The battlefield was silent now. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of smoke, broken ships, and bodies that no longer moved. The air smelled of burned metal and blood. The Great War had ended hours ago, yet the land still trembled like it remembered every scream. In the middle of this ruin, soldiers walked. Their armor was heavy, their faces dark with dust and anger. They dragged behind them a young woman, her wrists bound with iron chains. Her clothes were torn, her steps weak, but her eyes burned like fire that refused to die. They whispered to one another as they pulled her across the broken ground. "She is spoils of war," one said. "A gift for the commander," another laughed. "She should be grateful to live," a third muttered. The woman heard every word. She said nothing. She did not beg, she did not cry. She only lifted her chin and looked at the sky that had once belonged to her people. That sky was filled with enemy ships now. Like vultures waiting to feed, they brought her into a dark tent at the edge of the battlefield. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of oil lamps and old maps. At the center stood a tall man in black armor. His face was sharp, his eyes cold like steel. He was the commander, the one who had won the war. The soldiers pushed her forward, forcing her to kneel on the rough floor. "My lord," they said, "the spoils of war, as promised. She is yours." The commander said nothing. He looked at her with unreadable eyes. She expected him to smile with cruelty or to command her like property. But he only stood still, silent, his hands resting on the table where a map of the galaxy lay spread open. The silence grew heavy. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Finally, one of them laughed nervously. "She is stubborn, my lord. She speaks nothing, but we can break her." The commander raised his hand, and the soldier fell silent at once. His voice, when it came, was deep and calm. "Leave us." The soldiers hesitated. "My lord, leave," he repeated, without raising his tone. Yet his voice carried the weight of command. They obeyed. One by one, they walked out, leaving only the girl and the man in the tent. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her eyes were sharp, defiant. She wanted him to see her not as spoils, not as a prize, but as a living soul that would not break. He studied her for a long moment. His gaze was not like the soldiers. It was not filled with hunger or cruelty. But it was not kind either. It was something else, something she could not yet understand. Finally, he spoke. "What is your name?" She pressed her lips together. She would not answer. He had taken her people, her freedom, her future. He would not take her name. Minutes passed. He did not move. He did not demand again. Only silence filled the space between them. Outside, the battlefield still burned. But inside the tent, the war was different now. It was between his patience and her pride. At last, he turned away. He walked to a small table at the side of the tent. There was bread and water there, untouched since the morning. Without a word, he set it down before her. Then he stepped back and returned to his place near the map. She stared at the food. Hunger gnawed at her body, but she refused to touch it. Her pride was stronger than her stomach. She looked up at him again, expecting to see anger in his face. Instead, he was looking at the map as if she were no more important than the stars drawn on paper. Her heart beat faster. She could not understand this man. Every soldier she had met treated her as nothing. But this one, this commander, did not strike her, did not curse her, did not even try to touch her. He gave her food and silence. That was all. The confusion was worse than cruelty. Cruelty she understood. But this made her mind restless. The night grew colder. Outside, the wind carried the cries of soldiers celebrating victory. Inside, the captive sat with her chains, the bread untouched before her. And the commander lost in his maps. She did not know it yet, But this silence was the beginning. This small act, this bread. This unanswered question would change the course of both their lives. But in that moment, all she felt was the weight of her chains. And a heavy, unspoken question that hung in the air. Morning light broke through the torn canvas of the tent. The young woman opened her eyes to the sound of soldiers laughing outside. They laughed loudly, like men who had forgotten mercy, like men who believed the war gave them every right to celebrate. She lay on the rough floor, her hands still bound in iron. Her body ached, but her mind refused to bend. She sat up slowly, her gaze sharp, her heart heavy. Around her, the tent was filled with objects of war, broken banners, maps of worlds now conquered. But there was something different here, too. The commander's space was not filled with trophies of victory. It was organized, almost cold. No gold, no jewels, no women chained in corners. Only silence. She listened. The soldiers outside were speaking of her again. She will break soon. She is only a girl. She has nothing left. Her lips pressed together. They thought she was nothing. But inside her chest burned a fire. She would never let them see her cry. The flap of the tent opened. The commander stepped inside. His dark armor gleamed faintly in the morning light. He looked at her, then at the untouched bread from last night. Without a word, he removed it and placed fresh food and water in front of her. She stared at the offering. Still, she did not touch it. "You will starve yourself," he said, his voice calm, low. She lifted her chin. Better to starve than live as spoils of war. It was the first time she had spoken to him. Her voice was rough, but steady. The words hung in the air like a challenge. He did not respond at once. He only looked at her as if measuring her spirit. At last, he said, "You are alive. That is not spoils. That is survival." Her eyes narrowed. She did not believe him. To her, he was only the man who had taken everything. But the way he spoke unsettled her. There was no cruelty in his tone, no triumph. Only, wait. The soldiers outside grew louder. Their footsteps circled the camp. She could hear them shouting her name from a distance, not her real name, but the one they had given her, spoils. Every time they said it, her stomach twisted, her rage burned hotter. The commander's face hardened at the noise. He stepped outside. She leaned forward, straining to hear. His voice carried through the air, sharp and commanding. Enough, the camp fell quiet. The laughter stopped. The soldiers obeyed instantly, like children silenced by a strict father. She sat back, confused. Why would he stop them? Why would he defend her, even in this small way? Was it pride? Was she simply his property, and he could not allow others to mock what belonged to him? The thought cut her heart, but still, she wondered. When he returned, he did not speak of it. He stood by the map table again, marking new routes with a piece of dark chalk. His eyes were deep in thought, as if already planning the next war. She studied him carefully. His movements were sharp, but not careless. He was a man shaped by discipline, not greed. He carried himself like a blade, dangerous, cold, but precise. He was not like the soldiers who dragged her here, and that was what frightened her most, because cruelty she understood, cruelty she could hate. But this silence, this strange discipline, it unsettled her in ways she did not wish to admit. As the day passed, she thought of her home. She thought of the voices of her family, of the songs her people sang before battle. She thought of the fires that consumed everything she knew. Her chest tightened, and for the first time since capture, her eyes grew wet. She quickly wiped the tears away. She would not let him see. She would not let anyone see, but he had already noticed. "You mourn," he said quietly, without turning from his map. Her heart jumped. "I do not mourn," she snapped. "I remember." At that, he turned to face her. For a moment, Their eyes met, and she felt an unspoken war pass between them. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Almost as if he, too, remembered something lost. He said nothing more. The night came quickly. Soldiers sang outside, drinking to their victory. She sat in the dark, chained, her stomach empty, but her pride unbroken. Before leaving the tent, the commander looked at her once more. "You are not what they call you," he said softly. Then he was gone. The words echoed in her mind long after he left. Not what they call you, but what was she then? A prisoner, a survivor, something else? She did not know. Yet in that silence, in that strange moment between chains and freedom, she began to feel the smallest shift inside her heart. It was not trust, not yet, but it was something dangerous. The night was darker than usual. Clouds covered the broken sky, and only the weak glow of campfires lit the ground. The soldiers outside were drunk with victory. Their laughter was loud, their steps uneven as they stumbled around the camp. Inside the tent, the girl sat in silence. Her wrists ached from the chains, her stomach still empty. The commander had brought food again that evening. Once more, she had refused. Hunger gnawed at her. But she would rather starve than accept anything from the man who had destroyed her people. Yet tonight, she was not only hungry, she was restless. Her eyes moved to the flap of the tent. 2 guards stood outside. They were loud, careless, and drunk like the others. She could hear them boasting of battles they barely fought, mocking the dead as though they were trophies. Her heart pounded. For the first time, a thought grew bold inside her. Escape? Her hands trembled as she tested the chains. They were strong, but the rope tied at her ankles had loosened in the day's heat. She pulled, slow and steady. The fibers began to tear. Each sound of fraying rope was drowned by the soldier's laughter. At last, it snapped. Her breath caught. She rose quietly, her legs weak, but steady with determination. She moved toward the tent's opening, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. The night air was sharp and cold when she slipped out. The guards were too drunk to notice. She pressed herself into the shadows, her heart racing faster than it ever had. Every corner of the camp was alive with firelight and men celebrating. She moved like a shadow among shadows, praying no one would look her way. And for a moment, it worked. She reached the edge of the camp. Beyond lay the open field, the ruins of her people's land. Freedom was only steps away. But then a voice cut through the night. Stop. One of the guards had seen her. Shouts rose, heavy boots struck the ground, torches flared. She ran, her legs burning, her breath ragged. Chains clanged with every step, slowing her down. The field stretched before her like a cruel promise. She almost reached it when a soldier grabbed her from behind. She struggled, kicking, clawing, but his grip was iron. Another soldier joined him. Laughing as they dragged her back, she thought she could escape. One sneered. "Teach her a lesson," the other growled, raising his hand. But before the strike could land, a voice broke the night. Enough. The commander stood there, tall and unmoving, his shadow cast long in the firelight. His face was calm, but his eyes burned like steel. The soldiers froze under his gaze. "She is mine," he said. His voice was low, but it carried across the camp like thunder. The soldiers released her at once, their laughter dying in their throats. They bowed their heads, muttering apologies, and stepped back into the dark. The girl fell to her knees, breathless, trembling with rage and shame. She hated the soldiers. She hated the camp. But in that moment, she hated the commander most of all because he had stopped them, because he had saved her. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "Why?" she demanded. His face revealed nothing. "Because they are not worthy to touch you." His words struck her harder than any chain. not worthy. What did that mean? To him, was she still a captive, or was she something else? He bent slightly, offering his hand to help her stand. She slapped it away and rose on her own, her body shaking but her pride unbroken. He did not react. He only turned and walked back toward the tent. "Come," he said simply, and against her will, her legs followed. Inside, the air was thick with silence again. He placed a cloak over her shoulders without asking, then returned to his map. She stared at the cloak, then at him. Every part of her wanted to tear it off, to throw it in his face. But the warmth against her cold skin held her still. Hours passed. She sat in the dark, her body exhausted, her mind a storm. The commander worked quietly, never speaking, never looking at her again, and yet the moment outside kept replaying in her head. The way his voice had cut through the soldiers' laughter. The way they had obeyed him without question. The way he had said she was not theirs to touch. Hatred still burned inside her. But beneath it, something new stirred. A small, unwanted spark. Not trust, not forgiveness, but the dangerous beginning of a question. What kind of man was he, truly? The camp grew quieter after the night of her failed escape. The soldiers had been warned. None dared to speak her false name again when the commander was near. Yet she could still feel their eyes on her, mocking, waiting, enjoying her chains in silence. Inside the commander's tent, life followed the same rhythm. He would rise before dawn, study his maps, meet with his men, and return late at night with the weight of war on his shoulders. She would sit on the floor, chained but unbroken, refusing his food, refusing his questions. But something had changed. She found herself watching him, not with trust, not with kindness, but with suspicion sharpened by curiosity. He never celebrated like his soldiers. He never drank, never laughed at their cruel jokes. He did not treat her as an object, but neither did he treat her as an equal. He existed in a space between silent, controlled, untouchable, and that was what unsettled her most. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, he entered the tent carrying a small metal box. He placed it gently on the table. She watched with sharp eyes as he opened it. Inside was a piece of broken jewelry, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her breath caught. She knew it at once. It was from her people. A fragment of the necklaces worn only by warriors sworn to protect the homeland. Her voice broke the silence before she could stop it. "Where did you get that?" He looked at her, surprised. She had spoken to him only once before, in anger. Now her tone carried something else: memory, pain, demand. He closed the box slowly. It was taken from the battlefield. "I kept it." Her chest tightened. "Why?" "Because it belonged to someone who fought with honor," he said quietly. She stared at him, stunned. She had expected arrogance, mockery. But his words were steady, almost respectful. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something human in him. Not a conqueror, not a commander, but a man who understood loss. The silence grew heavy again, but it was no longer the same silence. It pressed against her walls, breaking cracks she had built around her heart. That night, as the campfires burned low and the soldiers sang themselves to sleep, the commander set food before her again. Bread, fruit, and water. She looked at it for a long time. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, but her body shook with weakness. Her vision blurred with hunger. Her hand moved, slow and trembling, until her fingers touched the bread. She tore a piece and brought it to her lips. He said nothing. He did not smile, did not show victory. He only watched with calm eyes, then turned back to his maps. It was such a small act, but in that moment, she hated him more than ever for forcing her to need him, for making her break her vow of silence. And yet, at the same time, she hated herself more for feeling relief as the bread touched her tongue. The next morning, as the sun rose pale over the camp, he asked again, "What is your name?" She froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her name was all she had left of her people. Giving it to him felt like giving away a piece of her soul. She turned her face away. "It does not matter," but his voice followed softly. "It matters to me." She clenched her fists, fighting the storm inside her. Hours passed. She said nothing. He did not ask again. That night, while he worked over his maps, she whispered at last, so quiet she was not even sure he heard. "Leora," his hand paused on the table. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to hers. For the first time, he spoke her name. "Leora." Something inside her cracked, sharp and painful. To hear her true name spoken aloud in this enemy tent, it was like hearing a ghost call her from another world. She looked away, her eyes burning. She did not want him to see the tears, but he had already turned back to his maps, his voice steady, almost respectful. "Leora, I will not forget it." The walls around her heart were not gone, but they were no longer unbroken, and that was more dangerous than chains. The camp slept under a restless sky. Clouds rolled like heavy beasts above, hiding the stars. The air was thick with the smell of oil and smoke, and the silence was broken only by the snoring of drunk soldiers. Leora sat inside the tent, her chains lighter now, though still present. She had spoken her name. She had taken food. The walls she built were no longer unbroken, and it made her uneasy. She hated herself for the weakness, yet her mind kept circling back to the commander, his strange calm, his unspoken respect. That night, as the commander bent over his maps again, she allowed herself to study him in the firelight. His face was stern, marked by years of war. His eyes were focused, but behind them lay something she could not name. Then the ground shook. The first blast was faint, like distant thunder. The second tore through the night-tan explosion of fire at the camp's edge. Screams followed. Metal clashed. Horses cried out in terror. The commander's head snapped up. Outside, chaos erupted. An enemy raid. Survivors of the defeated army had returned for blood. "Stay here," he ordered sharply, pulling his blade from its sheath. But Leora's heart raced. She knew the sound of those weapons. They were her people's, the resistance. Her chest tightened. Were they here for her? The tent flap burst open as a soldier stumbled in. "Commander, we're under attack." Their breaking through his words cut short as an arrow pierced his throat. He fell at their feet, blood soaking the floor. Before Leora could scream, the commander moved. He grabbed her, pulling her away from the opening just as another arrow struck the tent pole. The firelight flickered wildly, shadows dancing like demons. "Run with me," he said. She froze. "Why, you should let me go." "They are my people." His eyes burned with something fierce. "If they find you here, chained, they will not see you as one of them. They will kill you before they ask questions." His words struck cold truth into her chest. She hated it, but she knew he was right. To them, she was already lost. Spoils of war, the tent shook as another blast hit nearby. Without waiting, he cut her chains with one swift stroke of his blade. The iron fell to the ground with a heavy clang. Her breath caught. She was free, but there was no time to think. Soldiers stormed into raiders with knives glinting in the firelight. The commander moved like a shadow, his sword flashing, cutting one down before the man could strike. The second lunged for Leora, and instinct took over. She grabbed the fallen soldier's dagger and slashed wildly. Blood sprayed across her hands as the man fell, gasping his last breath. Her chest heaved. Her hands shook. She had killed before, in the war. But never like this, never as a chained captive fighting for her life. The commander's eyes met hers. For the first time, there was no coldness in them, only fire. "Stay close," he said. They moved together into the burning camp. Soldiers clashed all around them, steel against steel, arrows cutting through the night. Fire spread, tents collapsed, screams filled the air. Leora stumbled, but the commander pulled her up, never letting her fall behind. At the edge of the camp, a group of raiders blocked their way. One of them shouted her name. For a heartbeat, hope filled her chest. But his voice was filled with rage, not rescue. "Traitor." The man spat. "You eat with them, you walk with them. You are one of them now." Her breath shattered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. The commander stepped in front of her, blade raised. "She is mine to protect," he growled. The raiders charged. Steel met steel again, sparks flying. The commander fought like a storm swift, brutal, unyielding. Leora stood frozen, torn between two worlds, the people she had lost, and the man who now shielded her with his life. When it was over, the raiders lay silent on the ground. The commander's armor was cut, his arm bleeding, but he stood tall. His breath was heavy, his eyes still burning. He turned to her, voice rough. "Do you see now? You are not spoils. You are not theirs. You are not mine. You are your own." Leora's heart pounded with confusion, anger, and something deeper she dared not name. He had cut her chains. He had fought for her. And when her own people had turned against her, he had stood at her side. She looked at her blood-stained hands, then at the man before her. The firelight flickered across his face, making him look both fierce and strangely human. For the first time, she did not know whom to hate, and that was the most dangerous feeling of all. The raid had ended, but the camp was no longer the same. Burned tents lay in ashes. Blood marked the ground. The soldiers whispered more now, their laughter gone. Fear lingered in the smoke, and with it, suspicion. Leora walked among them the next day with her wrists unchained. The iron had been cut, and though no one dared to speak against the commander's choice, their eyes followed her with quiet hatred. To them, she was no longer just spoils of war, she was something far more dangerous. She could feel their stares burn into her back. Some whispered that she had cursed the camp. Others muttered that she had bewitched the commander. Their fear was sharp, but their envy sharper. Inside the commander's tent, the silence between them was different now. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of secrets, heavy and alive. At night, she sat near the fire, the warmth of a cloak around her shoulders. The commander sat across from her, sharpening his blade. Neither spoke much, but sometimes his eyes lifted, meeting hers in the flickering light. She would quickly look away, but her heart always beat faster after. It was a dangerous rhythm, one she tried to deny. One evening, when the camp had grown quiet, he broke the silence. "You fought well," he said simply. She looked up, startled. "I killed because I had no choice," he nodded. That is what war does. It gives no choice. For a moment, they shared the weight of that truth. She hated that he could speak words that felt so real, so familiar to her own pain. Her hands tightened around the cloak. "Why do you protect me?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally, he said, "Because you are more than what they call you. You have fire in you. I will not let them put it out." Her breath caught. She wanted to laugh, to call him a liar. But his voice was steady, and something in his eyes told her he believed every word. The walls around her heart trembled. That night, when she thought he had fallen asleep, she whispered softly to herself. She spoke the names of her family, her home, the ones she had lost. Her voice cracked in the dark, but she was not alone. "I hear you," the commander said quietly. Her breath froze. She turned to see him awake, his eyes watching her in the firelight. For the first time, there was no armor in his gaze, no shield. Only a man, stripped of command, listening in silence. She wanted to hate him for hearing. But part of her felt something else, something far more dangerous. Relief. The days passed, and small moments began to grow between them. She found herself speaking more. Not much, but enough. A word here, a question there. He answered in the same way, never too much, never too little, but always enough to keep her mind restless. One evening, as a storm raged outside, thunder shaking the ground, she laughed. It slipped from her lips before she could stop it quick. Soft, but real. The commander looked up, his eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in quiet wonder. "I did not think you could laugh," he said. She froze, ashamed, as if laughter were a betrayal of her people. "It means nothing," she muttered, but his voice was firm. "It means you are alive." The storm howled outside, lightning flashing across the sky. In that moment, Leora realized something terrifying. She no longer wished to escape him. Not tonight. Not when the world outside was filled with chains of its own. But she also knew the danger. If the soldiers saw her smile, if they heard her speak to him as more than a captive, they would not forgive her. They would not forgive him, and so their fragile bond remained in the shadows. At dawn, when the soldiers gathered, she kept her face cold, her eyes sharp. She spoke nothing, as if the fire inside her had died. But when she returned to the tent at night, the silence between her and the commander told another story. It was no longer the silence of enemies. It was the silence of two people bound by something they could not name, something fragile, something forbidden, something that, if discovered, would destroy them both. Dawn broke heavy and gray. The battlefield was quiet again, but the quiet was not peace. It was the waiting silence of men who had seen too much and trusted too little. Rumors had spread through the camp like wildfire. The soldiers no longer called her spoils of war aloud, but their eyes said it for them. They had seen the commander protect her. They had seen her walk without chains. And fear had turned to hatred. Whispers followed her everywhere. She bewitched him. She will bring his downfall. She must not live. Leora felt the danger, pressing in like a tightening noose. Every step she took was watched. Every word she spoke measured. The cloak around her shoulders felt heavier now. Comfort, but a mark that set her apart from everyone. That evening, the commander entered the tent with a face more severe than ever. His armor was dusted with ash, his blade dark with blood. He stood before her, silent for a long moment. Before he finally spoke, "They are planning something," he said. Her chest tightened. "Against me." He shook his head slowly. "Against us both," the words struck like thunder. Against him. Against her. The line was no longer enemy and captive. It was them against the world. Leora's breath quickened. "What will you do?" His eyes, usually so sharp and unreadable, softened for the briefest moment. "I will protect you, even if it costs me everything." Her heart twisted painfully. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him not to speak such words. He was her captor, her enemy, the destroyer of her people. But now, in the dim firelight, he was also the man who had cut her chains. The man who had shielded her when no one else would, and she feared what her heart already knew. That night, the camp turned against him. Shouts rose outside, angry voices demanding blood. Soldiers who once bowed now gathered in fury, their torches lighting the dark. They called him traitor. They called her curse. The commander stood at the entrance of the tent, blade in hand. He looked back at her once, his face calm but his eyes burning. "Go. Run while you can." She shook her head violently. "No. If I run, they will kill you. If you stay, they will kill us both, he said firmly. Tears burned in her eyes, though she fought them back. I cannot leave you. His jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask of commander slipped away, and she saw only a man tired, scarred, but alive with something fierce. You must choose Leora, he said softly. Your freedom or your chains with me. The voices outside grew louder. Footsteps approached. The soldiers were coming. Leora's heart raced. Her whole life had been stolen, her home, her people, her name turned into mockery. Yet here stood a man who had given her something she thought was gone forever. Her hand trembled as she reached for the cloak around her shoulders. Slowly, she pulled it off and let it fall to the ground. She walked to him, her steps steady, her eyes burning. My freedom is with you, she said. The words were not loud, but they carried more weight than any battle cry. The commander's face hardened with resolve. He took her hand not as captor, not as master, but as equal. Together, they stepped out of the tent to face the sea of torches. Gasps rose from the soldiers as they saw her beside him, unchained, her chin high. The crowd shouted, anger boiling, but there was something else to uncertainty. For the first time, she did not look like spoils of war. She looked like a queen standing beside her chosen king. The commander raised his blade. His voice thundered across the camp. She is not yours. She was never yours. She is free. The soldiers faltered. Fear and rage battled in their eyes. Some lowered their weapons. Others gripped them tighter. For one long moment, the night held its breath, and then one soldier dropped his torch. Another lowered his sword. The fire of rebellion dimmed, not with blood, but with silence. The commander's hand tightened around hers. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. For the first time, she believed. She was not spoils of war. She was not prisoner. She was Leora, her own, and no one else's, and in the shadows of a broken battlefield. She had found love where she least expected it, in the hand of the man once called her enemy.